Hello and welcome back to another episode of On Music and Making. My name is Jeremy. I'm a concert pianist based in the UK, and I'm also the host, creator, and producer of this show that you're currently listening to. In this podcast, I talk to great classical musicians about their stories and about their craft and their insights into music. And today's guest most definitely has a great story to tell, and also deep, meaningful insights into music and art in general to share with us all, and which you are sure to love and gain a lot from. A professor at the prestigious University of Music in Vienna, and also at the exclusive Queen Elizabeth Music Chapel in Belgium, Avedis Kouyoumdjian is currently one of the most sought-after pedagogues and professors in the world of classical music. He is a juror of many international competitions and also teaches in a variety of masterclasses across the world, from Europe all the way to Japan. And one such masterclass is the Schiermonnikoog Festival and Masterclass in the Netherlands, which I was fortunate enough to be selected to participate in this March. For a week in March, me and a few other colleagues worked intensively with Avedis on repertoire that we brought to the festival. And through these masterclasses with Avedis, I learned a great deal more about piano playing and about things which I've never thought of before. I was fortunate enough to interview him for my podcast at the end of this festival so that I can share with you all his amazing stories and thoughts on music. Throughout my lessons with him during the festival, I found that Avedis' approach to piano playing is very physical. He seeks to translate all artistic expression into physical gestures. And so what emerges is a very practical approach to the piano that can also sound very artistic and very expressive. For him, most importantly, everything must feel very natural. He also believes greatly in knowledge feeding into the musical imagination, something which I had sometimes almost unconsciously avoided doing. I always thought that working on the music has nothing to do with what we think or know about the person behind the score. Avedis showed me that his enthusiasm for music reaches way beyond the score itself, and he loves to know the stories behind and the concepts and philosophical concepts behind the music. And that's something that really inspired me during his lessons. I still remember very clearly the twinkle in his eyes whenever he plays or shares with us stories, anecdotes about music itself. As an Armenian born in Lebanon before the Civil War, during times of financial prosperity and great Western influence, Avedis' life straddles the final decades of Western imperialism and the modern current world order. Moving to Vienna when he was 12 to be educated musically, Avedis' musical education carried the marks of great traditions such as the Viennese tradition of Mozart, Haydn, and Beethoven, as well as the great Russian school of playing, which he later came into contact through teachers such as Stanislav Neuhaus and Alisha Kezheradze, who is also most famously the teacher and later wife of the great Ivo Pogorelic. Through our conversation, I caught a glimpse of what the world was like back then, and I could see that he looked back on it with a glow of nostalgia perhaps, while also admitting that the landscape has changed drastically since. It is therefore very interesting to see how he sees the current world and the role of classical music in it. As someone educated in the so-called older world order, while passing on the legacy onto pupils raised on a very different world order. It is interesting to see how politics and the ever-changing world changes how we see music, but also to see that there are certain fundamental concepts that are universal in art and music, which transcends time. This interview was recorded at a hotel restaurant. He was generous enough to give us some space during its off-peak hours. However, as it's still a public place, some background noise can be heard, but nothing detrimental to the content of the podcast. Nevertheless, my mic unfortunately cut off for a few minutes during the interview, and I have to apologize if it sounds a little bit distant, but fortunately, Avedis' mic was working perfectly, and that's what we all really need. Anyways, please enjoy this interview with Avedis Kouyoumdjian. All right, thank you, Avedis, for being here with me today on my podcast on music and making. So we just spent about a week at the beautiful island of Schiermonnikoog, where we had masterclasses with you. And we just finished the class concert just now where we kind of wrapped up everybody's performances and most of your teaching as well. How are you feeling after a week of masterclasses?
Tired,
yeah,
but at the same time very, very satisfied, because I saw the development of the work, although very short
yeah,
time for working, but the progresses were very considerable, and happy to have heard beautiful things also.
That's lovely. Yeah. And you do quite a few of these masterclasses, no? Is it very different from teaching in your normal conservatory setting?
Yes, absolutely, because the master classes are always in a short period, short time, and you can't be extremely detailed in master classes because you don't have the time.
Yeah.
Especially when you have to teach 45 minutes, it's a rather most important part of master classes are to give ideas, to inspire people, to show them possibilities, how they can influence or change their playings according to the problems that I discover when I teach. And so master classes are not places where you can make miracles. It's impossible for the short term. But I like it because it has a complete different approach than when you have a regular teaching, of course. The regular teaching is, you don't pack too much information in the regular system because you build up the preparation and the development, technical, musical, whatever it's concerned. But it's in master classes, it's very compact. So you have to put more information so that when they go home, they do remember things which was good for them or not. It's also good to forget things. But generally, yes, I like it, but it's very, very stressful because it's very dense and you nearly have no time to relax, really.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But I feel like you've also found a way to kind of condense some of your more general points into certain phrases that sometimes when I now work on certain pieces, I do remember.
Mm-hmm.
It's general things about, music from the classical period, for example,
Mm-hmm.
where you need to articulate or articulation equals expression. Things like that I
Mm-hmm.
kind of will be able to bring into my practice for future as well. And I think that's kind of the good thing about masterclasses is it's so concentrated that a lot of things can have very long-term effects.
Absolutely.
Well.
Yeah,
But,
I agree.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to talk to you more today about yourself because
Mm-hmm.
throughout the week you've been talking about us, about what we do, what we play.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell me a little bit about your own background or maybe even childhood? How you came to the piano?
Yeah, very... apparently what my parents told me, my father was a dentist, surgeon dentist, and so but he always wanted to become a violinist, so he played the violin. So my mother played the piano, but we had always a piano at home and constantly been played music, chamber music, so violin, sonatas, and so, because friends of my father came always over our home, and they played together. And they told me that when I was 3.5 or 4 years old, one day I just went to the piano, sat there, and started to play. And my father realized that that was not just some notes, it had some kind of a melodic structure, and he started to push me to make me repeat things, and then I started to sort of compose my own music by ears, playing and telling stories. That's how it started. And then when I got older and I had a teacher who came from Vienna, he was at that time I was in Lebanon, and he was my first piano teacher, and he has studied in Vienna composition and piano. So he gave me lessons, and that's where I started to read music, to understand what music is, until I was 12. And then after my father died, I had we had to make a decision whether I would like to continue staying in Lebanon, to go regularly to school and to give up music, or the option was to go in that direction. And this teacher, my former teacher, made the connection with Vienna University,
Yes.
the academy at that time, and he knew my first teacher in Vienna. So he spoke to him, and then he said he should come play for me. That we did. We went to Austria with my mother and my little brother, and I was introduced to him. I played for him, and he said immediately he will take me in his class.
Oh, wow.
So I passed the entrance exam in October, and I started in his class, and I was the youngest one in the class. All my colleagues were 10 years older than me, and that's my beginning in Vienna. And since I'm there.
Okay, so it was because of this one teacher who then...
Yes, because of a serious continuation of the musical education. That was the main reason.
So music started as something very natural and playful to you.
Yes.
But then it became a choice.
Yes.
When you were very young to have to come all the way to
Yes.
Europe. And because... what was it like in Lebanon with classical music and, being good at the piano?
When then they discovered me as the very talented young child, and so I was on TV, and I had always on newspapers, interviews, and so I was quite famous in Lebanon as a child. But we had a fantastic tradition also. Former Russian teachers were at the conservatory teaching different instruments, and there was quite good level. And then we had lots of Europeans, because Beirut as a city was a very, very European city.
Okay.
And there was also a cultural life, because we have there two oldest universities in the Middle East. One is the American University of Beirut, which was founded late 19th century. So it attracted a lot of people, a lot of teachers, lots of professors, and also the French university, because Lebanon was under the French occupation, sort of a protectorate, like Hong Kong was during the British time. And then they left, and it became independent. But this tradition of having lots of Western people, and it was a banking city. It was a kind of they said it was the Swiss of Orient.
Ah, okay.
And then after years, we had several civil wars and so, and all this economical aspect was lost. But it's a beautiful country. It's a small country. You have mountains up to 3,000 meters and the sea. And there is a period in the year, in April, May, you can go skiing and go having bathing in the sea. So I left Beirut and I went to Vienna, and there I am since 1971.
But you
Half
still
a century.
periodically, well, yeah.
More than a half a century.
But you still periodically went back.
Yes, until my family was still there, and then during the Civil War, my brother came to Austria, and then late 80s, my mother and my sister were still there, and they came to join me. But I still have cousins there, family.
I see. And so you told me about your significant moment in your childhood where you have to make the choice to come to Vienna. Did you also have a significant moment in your career?
Well, yes. So when the problem was this most beloved teacher died very young, when I was almost 16, and he was only 45. So he worked 3 times a week with me, 2 hours and 3 hours. So he formed me. He gave me everything that I owe him a lot.
May I ask who this?
It was Dieter Weber, who was a German, who was a colleague of Friedrich Gulda. They studied together in Vienna. They were very good friends. And my teacher was a phenomenal pianist. But he quit playing because he was very nervous to go on stage, but he could play incredible way. And so he died in 1976, and after his death, his former assistant took over the class, who was my second teacher then in Vienna, and I continued with him. And my first competition that I have won was in 1978. That was a local Viennese little competition where the prize was kind of a scholarship and then a concert with an orchestra. So I played first time in my life, 1979. It was the big concert in the big concert hall, the Golden Hall in Vienna.
Wow.
With Tchaikovsky's concert, first concerto. Wow, that was. Okay. And 2 years later, I won the Beethoven Competition, 1981, and that opened the big career then.
I see.
Lots of concerts around the world, in Europe, in the United States, in Japan and Canada and so. And that's how it started.
And this competition still exists, right?
It still exists. It's one of the oldest and traditional competitions. It was created in 1960 or 62, something like that. So, and my first teacher was one of the first winner of this competition.
Wow, full circle.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, before we move on to like talking a little bit more about the piano, I wanted to ask one more thing. What do you think you would be if you weren't a pianist, or have you ever thought about this?
Oh yes, yeah. I'm fascinated by medicine.
Okay.
My goal would have been, they had two. First choice would have been a neurosurgeon, because the brain is something for me I love to understand how it functions and why. It's a mystery still for all of us. And the second one choice would have been an archaeologist, because I love history.
Okay, wow.
I would love, because I love to travel, and that would have been fantastic to travel around the world and discover things, you know, make searching for historical places. So that was, but finally I stuck with the music.
So have you been anywhere which really tickled your archaeological fancy?
Well, I mean, in Lebanon is a very rich in historical past. We have there a history of minimum 80,000 years. So China would have been very interesting. Egypt, of course. The Middle East, I mean, all this area is full of interesting things to discover.
Wow, wonderful.
Or India could be fantastic too.
Huge places too.
Huge places. Yeah, so a lot to discover yet.
Yes, well, that's good. That's what we want in life. Yeah, there's more to discover all the time. In terms of, you know, you mentioned your first teacher, Dieter Weber, but also I read that you were trained by Stanislav Neuhaus and Alisha Kezheradze.
Yes.
So these were more Soviet teachers or Soviet trained teachers?
Russian trained teachers.
Yes.
So that comes from the Russian tradition. Yes.
Would you say that there were conflicting things between the two schools, or did you gain a lot of different things from different?
No,
sides?
not at all. You know why? Because for a simple reason that in the former Russian time, before the Soviet Union, the musical center was St. Petersburg. That was the musical central. And all the musicians, there were lots of Europeans who worked in St. Petersburg. And all the musicians of St. Petersburg were educated in Central Europe.
Okay.
Never forget Zilotti, who was a Liszt student. He was in Weimar, and then he went back to St. Petersburg. He taught a lot of people. Debussy was there. Leschetitsky, one of the famous piano teachers, was there. So, or the Auer for the violin school. So it was very influenced by the Central European tradition. French, German, that's what we had. The Italian was already past, because that was the operatic time of the 16th, 17th century. But for the modern periods, late 19th century, so Russian school is sort of, it has a kind of a component of lots of knowledge taken over by this educational system they had. But what they did then, during the Soviet Union, they have made a lot of research on the physical development of playing instruments. They made researches and they developed this kind of, it's like a sport, a kind of a sport, how to use all the muscles and so the ergonomic, whatever, all this type of understanding how it's the body functioning and so, and to comply into instrumental use. And that's fantastic and that's unique. Not in the German school. In the German schools, it's a little bit more limited to this kind of very classical, traditional finger articulation, something like that. The French had also a kind of a development, but the Russian school has played an immense role of physical development. But I think the teachers I have been working with them, they influenced me not necessarily only on my playing, but on my musical understanding, the listening. That's why I've learned with them to listen.
This was later, after you've won the Beethoven competition?
I met Stanislav Neuhaus before the Beethoven competition. Okay. And I was supposed to go to Moscow to study with him, and then he died in 1980. That was tragic for me. Another second teacher that I loved who died, too young. And then in 82, I met Ivo Pogorelic, with whom I am a very good friend. And he told me that I should come to London to play for his wife.
Ah, they were married by then already.
They were already married, and they were living in London already. So it was in 1982. I went to London, I played for Alisha, and she said, yes, I will work with you, no problem. So I was first 2.5, 3 years there. Then I went back to Vienna, and a couple of years later I went back, staying always a couple of months, working with her until she died in 1996.
Oh, I see.
So I was nearly trained by her, because her approach to music was very unique, because she had, interestingly, historically, a direct line to Beethoven.
Really?
Yes, because her teacher, when she was in Tbilisi, in Georgia, was a student of Zilotti.
Oh, okay.
Zilotti was a student of Liszt,
yes.
and Liszt was a student of
Czerny.
Czerny, and that's the Beethoven line.
Oh, wow.
That's fantastic.
Yes.
Really fascinating.
A lot of strands in your life.
Oh yeah, and I mean, and I feel that also in a way, because one must agree that Beethoven was the first composer who created the modern pianism. He was the first who used all arms and accords in his music, octaves, and so you didn't have that in Mozart's times or Haydn times. So he was the first.
I think it was very interesting what you mentioned about the way the Soviet school worked, because that seems to me something that we are doing more now. Research into how the brain works and things like that. And actually, I really find that with your teaching, that it's very much, and this is very like that. This is something very new to me, that you really connect the body movement to the music and to follow the music, and I find that very.
It's the consciousness of the contact with the instrument, and the use of the body, because you can't reduce your playing only in moving fingers. That's not enough. So the full body must be integrated, and that's something that they knew very well in Russia.
Because past mentors have kind of told me that, and I still feel this way, is that you first have to suffer before you can be free. Do you know what I mean? Like you have to train your fingers more.
That's a very masochistic approach.
Yeah.
I mean, whole life is a suffering. Playing is always a suffering. Imagine when you go on stage, you're nervous, you want to succeed, and so it's a way, some suffering there. But I understand what they say, but I think there is also ways to avoid that kind of suffering when you give a child, when in education, a strong basis, you know, and it starts with listening. That's very important.
I wanted to ask you if there's like a significant piece of music to you, whether this be something that has, you know, led you through some tough times, a certain particular piece of music, or something that you feel very close to now, or something you connect with a certain memory. Is there such a piece for you? Or such a composer, maybe?
Haydn.
Haydn, okay.
I love Haydn because Haydn is the one composer who provokes constantly my imagination through his richness of eccentricity in his language. And there is a particular piece I love a lot. This is the F minor variations, which are phenomenally difficult piece to play. Of course, Beethoven was my hero. As studying in Vienna, I grew up with Mozart, Beethoven, Haydn, Schubert, Brahms, all this, the German school. And then later on with the Russians, I discovered, of course, the French, Russian, Rachmaninoff, Prokofiev, and whatever. And then coming to a point at my age now, I'm convinced that if you are a musician and you have knowledge enough about tradition, what's historically has been developed, you don't need to have a specification of different schools. Okay. Because when you are a musician, you can play anything. Finally, at the end, what you play, it's an interpretation. There is no one way of playing a piece or a composer or things, you know. You have, of course, you have to know the knowledge to the traditions, how the classical music, what the Russian or the romantic development of music. But if you're a musician, you're a musician. Yeah. I consider myself more as a musician, as a pianist. Okay. Because music is the most important thing. Whether you play on one instrument, two instruments, three, or an orchestra, music is music. And that's what you should be aiming, becoming a musician, not a pianist.
But one must first have to be educated in all this.
Yes, and then, you see, you can get educated in the schools as much as they give you. The final educational level is always achieved by your personal interests. If you want to know more, you go, you search into internet or in bookstores or in bibliotheques, you know. There's so much information and literature about. So it depends upon someone personally if you want to know more. And the more you know, the more you understand.
So you think that knowledge does actually help enrich our music making?
Absolutely. One of the important knowledges is when you read Beethoven's letters or Mozart's letters, who wrote 7 bands of letters, Mozart, thousands of letters. If you read the letters and then you discover what the person, who the person really was. Yeah. And if we play a composition, we play Mozart, we play Schubert, we play Haydn, and so on, we have a connection to the person. It's not just, you know, it's far behind us time-wise, but they were living beings like you and me. And they had to put their emotions into music. Yeah. So it's constant relation with different people all the time. Yeah. So it's also good to understand the character of the pieces. Through the character, you discover the composer's character.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
It's always it's a very human thing, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Even if the music is very divine, it's still...
I mean, divinity is something which you can't express. Either you believe or not. And when I hear Bach, for me, I say, if there is a God, then there was a God who created Bach, because his music is really divine. And this is the only composer you can play in any century. After 1,000 years, he will be still very actual, contemporary. This is for me something which without doubt, and all who came after Bach, they knew Bach, and they studied well Bach.
Yeah.
He's the father of the modern music history.
Yeah. And what would you say at this stage of your career gives you the most fulfillment? Is it teaching? Is it performing? Or would you say playing for yourself now gives you the most joy?
I live a life of a musician, and playing, teaching is also part of that life. Passing the knowledge to other generations, it's important, because all your knowledge one day, if you're not there anymore, it's lost if you can't give it to the next generations. So I love to teach, I love to travel, I love to play myself too, and I love to practice a lot. I enjoy practicing, because practicing gives me also an experimental approach of how I could solve problems when I discover with my students.
Yeah.
Because individually each of them have different problems. So it's important to understand that and to put the finger on the right button.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
That's
I
important.
definitely feel that when you teach, it's always very tailored to. It's not like there's one approach and I will put this approach on every single person, but it's.
I
see what the problem
say
is.
always, I'm not here to produce photocopies of my person. That's not my duty.
Yeah.
My duty is to tell that's the direction, or these are the possibilities,
Right.
and finally it's your choice.
Okay, I'm going to ask you some more thought-provoking questions about the role of music in general in the world. In a kind of fast-moving world full of conflict, why do you think it's important for us to play classical music, to focus on, details like sound production, pedaling, things that, can be, we go into detail exploring music that is written by people from the past. How can it relate to the modern world?
Well, you see, when a piece of art, whether is it a painting or a poem, literature or music, when it is created, it doesn't get lost. It's there for generations. And creating art generally is part of our life, which helps us to make us more noble, more. It's good for the soul. It's good for the human being. As you said, we are in a world where you don't know what the future is going to bring us. So art or artists were the peacemakers for me, because art doesn't know nationality, art doesn't know nationalism, art doesn't know any political ideology. Art is art. Art is good for the human being. It's where the human being expresses his feelings, connected to the society, to the life you're living. You don't create art for yourself only. It's impossible. And music is the language which could be understood by the whole world. Whether you're educated or not, you can go in Central Africa and play some Mozart, and I'm sure they'll be astonished about what they hear. And it is impossible that they can't be influenced about what they hear. So the music has also a kind of a healing aspect. It touches you. These are waves, physically explained. But I think, and music is the only art which sounds every time different.
Yeah.
A sonata by Mozart played by 1 million people is 1 million different pieces. So the variety of expressing possibilities, it's astonishing. And that's why I don't think that Mozart is only for the Austrians or for the German culture no. It should be understood, and like Haydn, for instance, when he was alive, He was world-known musician by the sentence of the word, because he was played on all continents. Due to the British Empire, his music was spread all over the world. They knew him in Australia as well as in America, in Canada, where the British were. So music was part of the society and also part of the education. When you educate people with music, they become different people. I think that it's influential, very influencing. That's my opinion, and it should not be abolished. Art is abolished only by uneducated people. And most of uneducated people today are becoming politicians. And that's the tragedy of human society. When I came to Vienna in 1971, I remember very well going to concert halls and seeing politicians sitting there with scores, listening to music. So that was part of the education, to have a general education. Yeah. Now today you don't have general education anymore, you have a specialized education. Yeah. And that's a bit, for me it's a big question, why?
And that kind of leads me on to ask the next question then. Because of this specialization, musicians nowadays are also trained to feel like they are only specializing in certain things. And that's why this question for me, the answer you gave me is very interesting. But do you think that musicians have an obligation to society nowadays? And how can we?
By a lots of, then it becomes politically, what I would say now is musicians or artists, they have the obligation to influence the society, to make people better. It's their obligation. Whether, now coming back to a specialization, of course, the quantity of musicians are not to be compared about the quantity of musicians we had 100 years ago. Sure. You have more. And with the technical development of the world, also musical and skills have been developed naturally. 100 years ago, you could count 5 pianists who could maybe play all Chopin etudes. But today, you have 12 years old Chinese girls I've seen on YouTube. Yeah. It's amazing. They play all Chopin etudes without any problem. This is fascinating. And it touches me also, emotionally. It's fantastic. So this ability. But since the market becomes incredibly dense and not everybody has the same chance to succeed, so that's why artists are choosing ways to survive. So if you are good, for instance, there is a lack in market concerning the contemporary music, let's put it this way. Then so young people are very interested into jumping in a special way where they can survive, they can make money, they can have also opportunities to perform, yes. You see? Because classical tradition, like playing always like Sokolov or whatever, or Lang Lang and so all these people, they have this classical tradition. And in this market, it's very difficult for young people to survive, to make that huge career. Yeah. It's a chance or it's a special talent, I don't know how to put it.
So first you have to survive, then you think about
absolutely
changing the world.
Survival is very important today, yeah, for the young generation. For me, I have already my status. I can live with what I do and I can have a good, comfortable life. But young people have to think, I know it from my students, sometimes they have to do 2-3 jobs in order to be able to have money enough to eat, to pay their rents or whatever, and on top of it, to sit on the piano and to practice, and to be ready for the next lesson. Yeah. So it's incredible responsibility you, this generation, have. Yeah. We didn't have that. It was a different time.
Yeah, for sure. I read somewhere that you think competitions are good for young musicians.
Yes, absolutely.
Of course,
to try out their stress level, how they can survive on stage, And it's an opportunity to play the repertoire.
Yeah.
If they're lucky, they can win. If not, so what? It was a kind of a trial to survive on a stage, because it's a very stressful situation to play in front of the jury or colleagues and so. I think it's a good part.
But some would say that now the competition is, it's turning very much into some sort of business model as well. And of course it works differently back in your day. Now there are hundreds or thousands of competitions.
Yeah.
Do you think that it would also negatively affect young people's mindsets into what it means to be a musician?
As long as they are not aware of the real competition business, because look, I always consider there are three types of careers. Either you are a fantastic teacher, or you're a very good pedagogue or pianist, or you are a fantastic traveling jury member. It's a networking, it's a connection. I know you, you know me, you invite me to your competition, and I will help your students, and then when I am invited, I invite you in my competition, so I help your students. So this is another level of business has been created. And that's also this sometimes for me really difficult to accept results of competitions, because it's very difficult to have a competition where everything is objective and which is okay. Organizers, there are some organizers that try to do everything to avoid kind of manipulation. But since human beings are working, there is always a possibility to manipulate things. Like, it's a pity, but that's how it is. There's some competitions that are more objective, some are very political. So,
Well, thank you for being honest about it.
I am, because I always, when I sit in the jury, and people start to discuss about, oh, this was not that, and this was not that. I say always to my colleagues, I am not here to be satisfied what my taste concerns. If I want to be satisfied, I rather stay home. I wouldn't go to competitions. What is important in the competition is to see how young people present themselves, how can they convince you with their interpretations, even if I don't agree with their interpretations. I'm not looking for interpretations, satisfaction for my musical understanding. No, then I stay home, I don't go. And I also tell them, if you're looking for perfection, then stay home and listen to CDs. That's perfect. Human beings are not perfect, and they are allowed to make mistakes. And mistakes doesn't make you become less important. If you go back 100 years ago, you see the big pianists, who played perfectly? Nobody. Even Rubinstein or Horowitz, they play, but when they play also wrong notes, it's very convincing because it's part of their musical expression. So that's always my counterattack to people who become very academic in their approach. A competition is something which should give young people chance to express themselves or to present their musical point of view. And I'm not there to accept everything, but I can say, okay, it was nice, I would do this differently, but I like their approach. So it depends also of the personality of the people, see? That's very important.
And finally, what advice would you give a young aspiring pianist?
Most important part, I think, of the career is to know how to enjoy practicing. That's most of the time for young people, the part, because they are physically very active. They want to play, they play. Yeah, but before playing, you have to have also to know how to practice, to prepare. And that's also a part of the pedagogical approach in my teaching. I want them to learn how to practice, how to solve problems before you go on stage. And many teachers don't do that. because they speak about poetry, they speak about the blue sky, they speak about, it's nice sound, but okay, wonderful. But young people know, I know what you're telling me, but I want to know the tools how to prepare all that. You see? So they are more practical. And this is important. And if you are a person who has that experience, you should give that pass to the young. So how to practice and not to get bored, that's very difficult.
Well, I have to say, I think you've done your work, because I definitely enjoyed practicing my Mozart today. Yeah. Well,
thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your wonderful insights and and answers. Thank you so much, Avedis.
Thank you, my dear.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of On Music and Making with me, Jeremy, and our guest, Avedis Kouyoumdjian. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to Avedis and getting his thoughts on music, and I hope you've been as inspired listening as I have interviewing him. If you're listening to this on Spotify, please hit the follow button and leave a rating, as this will really help the podcast grow. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please feel free to hit the like button and click subscribe. Stay tuned for more, and I'll see you very soon.